Dr. Melanie Joy. At one point in your life, you had to make a decision to become vegan. How did that happen?
Well, like so many people, I grew up with a dog who I loved like a family member. And like most Americans, I grew up eating meat, often multiple times a day. And I never thought about how strange it was that I could be petting my dog with one hand and eating a pork chop with the other without recognizing the inconsistencies in my attitudes and behaviors toward animals. I had that knowing without knowing. On one level, I knew that whenever I ate meat, someone had to die for my plate. But on another level, I just didn't connect the dots. So I had what I later came to recognize was this gap in my consciousness. And over time, due to a series of incidents, I was exposed to literature on vegetarianism, on meat production, in fact. I wasn't ready to take that in over the years. When I was a teenager, my response was typically, don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal. But over time, I became increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of eating other sentient beings. And one day, back in 1989, I actually woke up to find myself hooked up to IV antibiotics at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston after having eaten what turned out to be my very last hamburger. I had contracted Campylobacter, which is like the sister disease of Salmonella, and that lit a fire under me, so to speak. It really, before then I had really felt like a vegetarian living in a meat eater's body, and I really, after that incident, I never wanted to look at meat or eat meat ever again, and I never did. And what was so interesting was that as I stopped eating animals, that gap in my consciousness that I had started to close. It's so interesting how the gaps in our consciousness only become visible once they start to disappear. And I wanted to learn about animal agriculture. I wanted to understand this truth, a truth that had been right in front of me. It had been all around me, but that I had been unable or unwilling to see. And what I learned really, it really shocked me. And it deeply moved me, and I felt compelled to speak out and share what I learned with others. And so I began teaching workshops. At this point I was vegetarian, not vegan. Several years later I became vegan as I learned more about the dairy industry. And I began teaching workshops in the Boston area about vegetarianism, and what was so striking was that people would come to my workshops, they would be moved, they would be in complete agreement with the principles that I was discussing, the ethics of the issue. And yet many of them would leave and not stop eating animals. And I became curious about how it was possible for humane, rational people like myself to participate in inhumane, irrational practices without realizing what they're doing. And that's what really led me to do the work that I do today on carnism.
I would like you to explain a little bit what your work is.
Carnism is best explained through an example. So imagine that you're a guest at a dinner party and you're sitting down to a delicious beef stew. And in fact, sorry, do you want me to like not?
There's a little creature.
I know, but I'm not gonna.
That's cute.
So imagine you're a guest at a dinner party and you're eating a delicious beef stew. And in fact, the stew is so delicious that you ask your host for the recipe. And flattered, she replies, sure, the secret's in the meat. You need to start out with 3 pounds of well-marinated golden retriever. Your reaction, or one's reaction, is an example of carnism. Carnism is the invisible belief system or ideology that conditions us to eat certain animals. It's essentially the opposite of veganism. And we tend to think it's only vegans and vegetarians that bring their beliefs to the dinner table. But most people don't eat pigs but not dogs because they don't have a belief system when it comes to eating animals. I mean, really, when eating animals is not a necessity for survival, it's a choice. And choices always stem from beliefs. And carnism is a belief system that's organized around extensive, intensive, and completely unnecessary violence toward other sentient beings. Most people, the vast majority of people's value system does not condone such practices. And yet the vast majority of people participate in and enable such practices. So ideologies like carnism that require people to act against their core values, act against their own interests, and act against the interests of others, need to use a set of social and psychological defense mechanisms so that people's awareness and empathy are blocked. In other words, carnism teaches us how not to feel.
Have you created an awareness to the point that people have shifted their choices that you know of?
I have gotten a good deal of feedback from vegans, vegetarians, and meat consumers alike that by reading the book, they're able to put into words something that they've already known on a more visceral level. And I think I view people who are consumers of meat as victims of this system. My book is not talking about simply why people shouldn't eat meat and other animal products. It's talking about why people do in the first place. And I wrote my book because I do believe that people need and deserve to know the truth. And I do believe that most people do want to live according to their values. They do want to live a life that feels meaningful and authentic to them. They do want to be able to make their choices freely and make choices that reflect who they truly are, what they truly think and feel, rather than what they've been taught to think and feel. So the response has been largely quite positive, because people we all live within this dominant carnistic system that has a profound influence on our preferences, on our choices, on some of our core beliefs. And to be able to step outside of that is quite liberating.
Those of us who are already vegan, it can be a conversation of your work that we can have with non-vegans to make them understand their own behavior, in a sense. Is that correct?
And yes, and to help them understand our choices as well. I think when we look at the issue of eating animals, it's not simply a matter of personal ethics, but in fact, as the inevitable end result of a deeply entrenched belief system, then this radically reframes the way that we think and talk about the issue, vegans and carnists alike. I shouldn't say carnists, I should say meat eaters. Actually, it's not, if this is for meat eaters, so I'll restate that. So by shifting the focus from veganism to carnism, what we do is we don't look at the act of eating animals simply as a matter of personal ethics, but rather as the inevitable end result of a deeply entrenched belief system. And so this radically reframes the way that we think and talk about the issue for vegans and vegetarians and meat eaters alike.
How do you see the future? I mean, how long do you see that it's going to take for people to...
The million-dollar question, right?
Yeah, let's get this thing going. Have you had a thought about that?
I feel very hopeful about the future. I feel that veganism is the wave of the future. I see a lot of movement toward veganism. I see, there are vegan organizations and foods and restaurants and cookbooks and celebrities springing up everywhere. Vegan is a word that just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, most people didn't know, and it's becoming mainstream. And I also believe that most people truly do believe in and embrace the philosophy of veganism. And people are learning now that it's a possible philosophy to carry out in practice. We vegans obviously we need to be models for this. So I'm very hopeful, because I do believe that humans are self-integrating. I believe that the goal, like many psychological and spiritual traditions teach us, that the goal of human development is integration, is becoming more whole. Integration between body, mind, and spirit, id, ego, and superego, self and other. Most importantly, between values and practices. And that's what integrity is, the integration of values and practices. And I think we live in a world of people that are hungry for meaning, that really are just starved to live more authentic and freely chosen lives.
The word carnism, I know you coined it, and you touched on it a little bit, but how did you come up with that term?
People ask me that a lot. The moment that I had this idea of the word carnism, I don't know when that word actually popped into my mind, but when I was a doctoral student doing my dissertation on the psychology of eating meat, I was interviewing people even before I formally started my dissertation, doing my pilot studies. I was interviewing vegans and vegetarians. I interviewed meat eaters and butchers and meat cutters and people who had raised and killed their own animals for food. I was curious about the psychology behind these practices. And, of course, a common theme emerged. Virtually everybody I spoke to had an extremely similar experience, either eating or working with meat. And so I realized, and I had a hunch before going into my research, that there was much more going on here than individual attitudes and behaviors toward animals. These attitudes don't exist in a vacuum, and I recognized that there was just a broader system or ideology at work. I mean, widespread violence that marks ideologies such as carnism is only, or widespread violence that marks the practices such as eating animals is only possible within the context of a widespread ideology.
Has there been a backlash of any sort? I mean, have you had criticism from particular avenues of, or groups of people or industries? Have you had any issues around the book, which many times can be a positive thing and to be criticized?
Yeah, well, the response has been overwhelmingly positive, with the exception of a few people here and there online. Bloggers, for instance, writing about this issue have, responded to it negatively, which is not surprising. And actually, when my book was pre-released, the galleys of the book were sent to Amazon Vine reviewers, which are reviewers that get pre-release items, and the demographic was supposed to be selected of. They were supposed to select a demographic that would be representative of the people that would buy the book. They were sent to people who had shown an interest in food, eating, cooking, restaurants, and animal issues, and some of those animal issues did not include animal issues that were issues that were in the best interest of animals. So there was not a very positive response among that readership. Apart from that, it really has been overwhelmingly positive, including radio interviews with people who are lifelong meat eaters, people I know who are hunters, because talking about carnism is less triggering for many people than talking about veganism is. There's already a stereotype about what it means to be vegan and what veganism stands for. Talking about carnism, it kind of depersonalizes the issue. It takes not to say that people who participate in carnism aren't responsible, but it helps to put the issue in the context of a system, so that we're not blaming the individual. We're not saying you're a bad person because you're eating animals. We're saying you're a part of this system that is not in your own best interest.
So how long have you been vegan?
I was just thinking about that, as a matter of fact. I've been vegetarian for 22 years, I believe, and vegan for I think 8 of those years.
What do you love to eat? How's that for a big question? We could start with the morning.
Yeah, well, what
Now,
don't
I know you
love
like
to
coffee.
eat is coffee in the morning, yeah. I love to eat, period. I'm a big foodie. Eating and cooking are passions of mine. What do I love to eat? If it's vegan, I probably really enjoy eating it. I'm a big fan of greens. I eat a head, 1 to 2 heads of green leafy vegetables every day.
Oh, and your favorites?
Kale, collard greens, Swiss chard. I cook them up with some garlic and put some liquid aminos on them.
Oh, yes.
And nutritional yeast. And I'm just completely addicted to them.
And
vegan
for those who
pizza,
don't know
yeah.
about liquid aminos.
Oh, liquid aminos, that's right. Liquid aminos are, they're like a healthy version of soy sauce, but they don't taste so salty. They have a distinct flavor, and they've got they're amino acids.
What about a green drink?
I don't have a blender that blends greens very well, so I tried drinking green drinks with my normal blender, but it was a little gross. The greens didn't blend up quite that right, so it was kind of like slush.
Yes. This means you need to put more liquid in it, or you might be willing to strain it afterward.
Yeah, it means I need to one day get a Vitamix and actually do it right.
Yeah.
But fruit smoothies, I love fruit smoothies.
What is your favorite?
Fruit smoothie? Generally, I try to mix 4 different types of fruits in each smoothie and mix it up every day, make a different one every day. So I like to have, 2 or 3 different types of berries, and a banana, and maybe an apple or a pear.
Yeah, it seems like the banana is always in there.
The banana's always in there. Yeah, that's the junk food part of the
Yeah.
smoothie.
And then what about the liquid for it?
Rice milk usually is what works best for me.
Do you have something to say in our closing to that person who is trying to stick their toe in and they're afraid that, oh, I don't know what to cook, or, oh, I'm afraid I won't get all the nutrients I need, or, oh, I'm afraid that, whatever their excuse is. And I'm sure you run into this by people you meet at dinner and they discover you're vegan, and what would you say to somebody who is contemplating this?
Well, first of all, I would commend them on the fact that they're open to this issue, and really share with them how personally empowering veganism has been to me. And like any lifestyle change, there's a learning curve. I mean, there's a period of transition where it's a matter of getting used to new things and breaking old habits. But it's a really good habit to be developing, and it's a learning curve that doesn't last that long. And the information, in my book lists a bunch of resources. I would say get connected with community online so that you don't feel alone in this. There
That's a good idea.
lots of good forums online for people who are curious about these issues, where they can exchange ideas and talk to other people who will likely be having the same questions. There are some great books out there for people who, Patty Brightman and Carol Adams' book, How to Cook Like a Vegetarian, even if
You don't wanna be
wanna
one.
is a great book. So there are, many websites with great resources. But I would say really get support and connect with other like-minded people.
That's a great idea. Melanie, thank you so much.
Thank you.